In 1847, artist Edward Anderson documented the harrowing situation unfolding in Ireland. His paintings depicted incredibly poignant stories filled with despair and anguish of mothers who, in their suffering, cradled the emaciated bodies of their children. Tears streamed down their faces as they pleaded for a few coins to provide a dignified burial for their little departed ones. The streets were crowded with gaunt masses, their protruding bones visible through tattered garments. Once fertile potato fields lay ravaged, their bountiful harvest turned into a blackened mass tainted by a deadly pathogen known as the Great Famine. It claimed the lives of 1 million people, which constituted a staggering 11% of Ireland's entire population in a mere 7 short years. The repercussions of this catastrophe have reverberated through generations, as the country's populace never fully recovered. Yet, even after the dust settled, Ireland remained entrenched in poverty, as the waves of industrialization sweeping across the European continent bypassed it, compounded by a relative scarcity of due to the lack of natural resources, dependence, and decades of disastrous economic policies. Ireland remained a backward, primarily agrarian society well into the 20th century, earning it the infamous title of the sick man of Europe. Even in the 1970s, Ireland seemed trapped in a cycle of stagnation, with its citizens experiencing low living standards, leading many to migrate in search of better opportunities. However, if you look at the list of the world's richest nations, you will see something truly astounding. If we exclude microstates, Ireland is now the second richest country in the world. Its citizens are among the most educated, prosperous, and happiest in the world. But to the untrained eye and the fundamental principles of macroeconomics, this doesn't make much sense. How it was achieved so quickly. Unlike other countries on this list, Ireland doesn't possess any inherent qualities that make it specially primed for prosperity. It doesn't have trillions of dollars of oil like Norway and Qatar. Its population is not small like Luxembourg and Singapore, which makes rapid growth more challenging. It's also not more educated or historically wealthy like Switzerland. However, the most peculiar aspect of Ireland's economy today is that it continues to grow at a pace that simply should not be possible for a highly developed country. Let's take the year 2015, for example. Ireland's economy is still growing, although it doesn't seem possible for a highly developed country. For instance, while the aggregate GDP growth of the other 5 countries mentioned was 2.76%, Ireland achieved a growth rate of 25.2% that year, the fastest among all nations in the world. Therefore, it seems that Ireland is poised to become the wealthiest nation in the world. But how exactly did Ireland become so incredibly rich in such a short time? And is this economic miracle too good to be true? The difficulties faced by the Irish in the 19th century cannot be overestimated. At that time, Ireland was under the control of the British Empire, which not only exploited the country's resources, but also treated its people as second-class citizens. The Irish economy itself was outdated, with 90% of the workforce engaged in simple agriculture, the majority of which was subsistence farming. To make matters worse, laws and social traditions dictated that all sons would inherit an equal share of their father's land, leading to smaller and smaller plots with each successive generation. This meant less food and lower efficiency in production, as small plots were inferior to larger estates in terms of their ability to invest in better tools and allocate labor more efficiently. As a result, the population was trapped in increasingly dire conditions. And when we add to this the lack of coal, iron, and sufficient capital, the prospect of industrializing like neighboring countries was impossible. In fact, at the time of independence for Southern Ireland, some 70 years after the famine, it had only a few factories, breweries, and textile mills. Several decades after the Great Famine, Ireland had only a few factories, breweries, and textile mills. Independence gained through a bloody war in 1922 did not improve Ireland's economic situation. In fact, it came with significant costs. The conflict not only physically damaged the economy but also plunged the newly formed nation into a prolonged economic war with its former ruler and primary trading partner, the British Empire. Additionally, the resulting debt crisis left Ireland entirely unprepared for the greatest global economic crisis in modern history, the Great Depression. By 1932, Ireland found itself even more impoverished than before, and its connections to the rest of the world only further weakened it. In search of a better solution, Ireland looked at the only industrialized nation that not only survived the Great Depression but thrived due to its self-reliance, the Communist Soviet Union. The Soviet Union's relative isolation from international financial institutions and trade shielded it from external shocks in an effort to break free from the last remnants of British domination. Ireland decided to industrialize on its own terms and find its own way out of poverty, taking inspiration from the USSR. Ireland adopted protectionist policies to isolate its economy and strive for self-sufficiency. The government swiftly took control and monopolized major corporations, effectively banning most foreign investment and trade. However, with hindsight, we know that economic isolation and protectionism are a recipe for disaster. In Ireland's case, the negative effects were particularly severe. The country was not well industrialized to begin with, lacking the necessary resources, and its small workforce was unable to start or staff all the industries required to provide the economy with adequate supplies. As a result, the economy contracted further, and conditions became so terrible that 500,000 Irish people fled the country within a decade. But perhaps most significantly, Ireland's protectionist policies meant that it missed out on the post-World War II European economic boom. By the late 1950s, Ireland was even further behind the rest of the continent than it had been when it gained independence. In 1993, the European Union and its single market were established, with Ireland becoming a member. The major benefit of this was a significant reduction in regulatory barriers and ultimately the lowering of trade prices between European Union members. One fantastic immediate result for Ireland was a quadrupling of the value of its agricultural exports. Additionally, the country received substantial subsidies and loans for developing education infrastructure and investing in human capital. However, the most important aspect for Ireland was that it now had a backdoor into the European market, which multinational corporations could utilize to avoid tariffs and taxes. Combined with Ireland's already low corporate tax rate, well-educated English-speaking workforce, relatively low labor costs, and prime geographical location between the United States and Europe, Ireland became an incredibly attractive location for U.S. companies to relocate or expand their operations. This was especially true for high-tech manufacturing, research and development, and financial services. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, as the United States was experiencing its own economic boom with very low interest rates, which supercharged investments. The sheer amount of investment that flooded into Ireland in the 1990s was colossal. Within just 10 years, foreign investment as a component of Ireland's economy went from 2.2% to an astounding 49.2%. Unemployment dropped sharply as the market was now filled with well-paying jobs. Indeed, during this period, the average wages of Irish workers increased from 2/3 of British workers' wages to being 20% higher. Coupled with steep cuts to the income tax rate, Irish citizens now had significantly more disposable income than ever before, which they poured back into the economy, while taxes were low. The scale of economic growth enabled the government to increase spending on various areas, including infrastructure, city modernization, and attracting even more companies. These companies, in turn, accumulated profits and stored them in Irish bank accounts to avoid taxes in their home countries. Ireland allowed them to freely spend these funds in the country, largely with little to no additional taxes, thus creating a positive feedback loop for investment. By 2007, the Irish economy had increased almost sixfold, making it the third wealthiest nation on the continent and 40% richer than its former British ruler. However, this growth did come with some trade-offs. Ireland's rapid growth had made its economy heavily reliant on U.S. corporations, U.S. banks, and cheap interest rates. Consequently, the economy became hyperexposed to the global economy. At the same time, income inequality rose significantly, although it remained lower than the European average. Nevertheless, the biggest drawback was that as its economy grew, Ireland became more dependent on U.S. corporations, U.S. banks, and favorable interest rates. Unfortunately, this growth came with certain consequences. As a result of the rapid economic growth, Ireland's economy became heavily reliant on American corporations, banks, and favorable interest rates. This made the country highly vulnerable to global economic influences. Moreover, income inequality rose, although it remained lower than the European average. However, the largest concern was that, as Ireland's economic development continued, it became increasingly dependent on American corporations, banks, and the favorable interest rates. Unfortunately, This growth came with certain consequences. In 2015, something truly strange happened. Despite the challenges and setbacks caused by the Great Recession, Ireland began to experience a remarkable turnaround. The economy started to grow at a faster pace, and the country regained its economic momentum. This recovery was fueled by several factors. Firstly, Ireland's export-oriented sectors, particularly in technology and pharmaceuticals, saw a resurgence. Multinational companies continued to invest in Ireland, attracted by its favorable business environment, skilled workforce, and proximity to both the European and American markets. This influx of investment and job creation contributed to the revival of the economy. Secondly, the Irish government implemented strategic measures to address the issues that had led to the economic downturn. Reforms were introduced to stabilize the housing market, strengthen financial regulation, and restore fiscal discipline. These measures helped restore confidence in the Irish economy and laid the foundation for sustainable growth. Additionally, the supportive policies of the European Union and the International Monetary Fund, as part of the bailout package, played a crucial role in Ireland's recovery. The financial assistance provided stability and allowed the government to implement necessary reforms. As a result of these efforts, Ireland's economy rebounded and experienced a period of strong growth. The country regained its reputation as an attractive destination for foreign investment and became known for its thriving tech industry, innovative startups, and skilled workforce. However, it's important to note that the recovery was not without its challenges. The scars of the recession remained, and the effects of income inequality and the housing crisis persisted. The Irish government continued to address these issues through targeted policies and investments in social welfare programs, affordable housing, and education. Overall, the Irish economic recovery showcased the resilience of the country and its ability to bounce back from a severe economic downturn. It also highlighted the importance of sound economic policies, a favorable business environment, and global partnerships in fostering sustainable growth. In a single year, Ireland reported an astonishing 25.2% growth in its economy. To put this into perspective, the second fastest growing economy that year was Ethiopia, with a growth rate of 10.4%. Such a high GDP growth figure for an already wealthy and developed nation raised concerns among economists, who suspected that something unusual was happening. Their suspicions were justified when it was revealed that Apple had executed a massive transfer of $300 billion worth of intangible assets to its Irish subsidiary, as part of a long-standing tax avoidance scheme. This tax avoidance scheme was just one of many tools employed by large U.S. multinational corporations, and since the late 1980s, Ireland had become the world's largest tax haven. Efforts to close Ireland's most significant tax avoidance tool, known as the Double Irish, in 2014 resulted in a wave of corporate restructurings. Essentially, a substantial portion of Ireland's inflated GDP figure was derived from revenues that never actually entered the country's economy. Instead, it was a statistical byproduct of tax evasion. The international and domestic scrutiny that followed forced the Irish government to adopt another metric, known as modified gross national income, to measure its economy. This new statistic aimed to provide a more accurate representation of the country's economic performance, accounting for the distortions caused by tax evasion. It's worth noting that these revelations and subsequent actions taken by the Irish government demonstrate the complexities and challenges associated with tax avoidance, and the need for global efforts to combat such practices. Ireland's economic growth resulted in significant infrastructure development, urban modernization, and increased attraction for a greater number of companies. These corporations accumulated profits and stored them in Irish banks to evade taxes in their home countries. Ireland facilitated their unrestricted spending within the country by imposing minimal additional taxes, creating a favorable cycle of investment. By 2007, Ireland's economy had grown almost sixfold, making it the third wealthiest nation on the continent and 40% richer than its former British ruler. However, this growth was accompanied by certain drawbacks. Ireland's rapid development led to heavy reliance on U.S. corporations, American banks, and low interest rates. Consequently, its economy became highly vulnerable to global economic influences. Income inequality also increased, although it remained below the European average. One major drawback was the soaring cost of living. Coupled with a lack of government oversight and low interest rates, these factors caused a housing market bubble, private debt escalation, and excessive government spending. As a result, Ireland's economy became inherently weak and susceptible to global shocks, which proved disastrous when the Great Recession hit in 2007. The collapse of the U.S. housing market had a severe impact on Ireland. Housing prices in Dublin plummeted by 56%. Widespread defaults led to a banking crisis, and unemployment rates skyrocketed as companies laid off a significant portion of their workforce. The entire economy contracted by almost a quarter, pushing the Irish government to the brink of bankruptcy. Subsequently, the government received a massive bailout of €67.5 billion, 40% of Ireland's total GDP, from the IMF and the European Union. In return, the government implemented harsh austerity measures, including substantial cuts in state employees' pay, the closure of 41 government institutions, and a general reduction in government spending. The economy eventually stabilized and experienced modest growth by 2013. However, it seemed that the Irish economic miracle had come to an end. Surprisingly, in 2015, Ireland reported an astonishing 25.2% GDP growth in a single year. This raised concerns among economists, as such a growth rate for an already developed nation seemed implausible. The truth behind this anomaly was revealed when it was discovered that Apple had transferred $300 billion worth of intangible assets to its Irish subsidiary. As part of a long-standing tax avoidance scheme, Ireland had become the world's largest tax haven since the late 1980s, and efforts to close its major tax avoidance tool, the Double Irish, in 2014 triggered corporate restructurings. Consequently, a substantial portion of Ireland's inflated GDP figure was the result of statistical byproducts of tax evasion, with revenues that never actually entered the Irish economy. The international and domestic attention drawn to this issue compelled the Irish government to adopt a new metric, known as modified gross national income, to measure its economy. In the first year of publishing this new statistic, it was revealed that Ireland's real economy was 30% smaller than previously reported GDP. This further intensified the pressure on Ireland to increase its corporate taxes and eliminate its remaining tax schemes. By 2020, Ireland had closed major tax loopholes. However, this does not mean that Ireland's special economic advantages have vanished, or that multinational corporations are leaving. Foreign companies continue to choose Ireland due to the extensive investments they have already made in infrastructure. Additionally, Ireland boasts a highly skilled and educated workforce that is difficult to find elsewhere. Furthermore, aside from the closure of tax loopholes, Ireland remains a business-friendly nation, making it an ideal location for global operations. While Ireland's economic boom primarily benefited foreign companies rather than its own people, the influx of well-paying jobs and technical expertise has significantly improved the standard of living for the Irish population. Opportunities have opened up that were previously unimaginable. Nevertheless,